Thank you very much. Very nice to talk to you all today at this event to discuss a very interesting topic. Essentially what I'll cover today is sort of some of the best practices around the topic of green shipping, and then we'll explore some of the challenges within that and look at some of the strategies that shipping companies can follow to address those challenges. I want to just set the scene a little bit by talking about what's driving this change, and actually an interesting dynamic is the sort of potential tiering of the markets that we'll see across shipping based on the implementation of different regulations around the world. What I mean by market tiering is essentially shipping companies have a question to answer of which market would they like to play in. At the low level, it's essentially complying with international regulations and simply having a kind of ticket to international trade. But as you move up the tiers, you can align with more stringent targets and regulations and access those markets. A great example is in the EU with EU ETS and Fuel EU, where essentially those regulations will create a dynamic where the most efficient vessels and vessels with dual fuel capabilities will be required for EU trades. So shipping companies need to take a sort of call on whether they want to position their fleets and assets to be able to access that market. And this sort of brings the question about of when shipping companies are looking at this challenge, what's the sort of balance between the sort of short-term positioning and the long-term positioning? So what do you do with your existing assets to keep them attractive in the market, but then long-term, selecting the right fuels and so on to make sure your fleet can sort of remain attractive to charterers. Within those challenges, I think, we always talk about ship owners having kind of 4 levers available to them to reduce their emissions and help decarbonize. The first one is speed optimization, so reducing speed of vessels and reducing their consumption. The trade-off here is that, of course, if you reduce the speed of the vessel, then it may be less attractive to your charterers because you have to run it at a slower speed, so maybe doesn't comply with the market conditions. But of course, it is a sort of slightly easier first port of call in terms of reducing emissions. Then we've got energy-saving devices. So I think there was a lot of talk about that in the previous panel. This is all about improving the standing efficiency of the vessel to improve its emissions intensity. Then we've got fuel transition, so that includes anything from drop-in biofuels to main engine retrofits to convert to burn alternative fuels. Of course, serious challenges there around the investment case. These are high capex options. What is that going to do to the asset? Is it going to extend its life? What will that do to the residual value of that ship? And then, of course, new builds, so fleet replacement, getting more efficient vessels on the water. Of course, the fuel question coming into it as well, but also thinking about fleet composition. So do we need to move towards larger asset sizes, for example, to get to a more efficient form of transportation, or even looking at future energy markets of, what actually will, the future cargoes be for fleets of vessels. I want to basically just sort of run through a few sort of case studies of the way we've sort of been approaching these challenges with our clients and LR. So I think one of the main questions is, how do we maximize value from existing ships? The most responsible thing to do is not to simply replace every vessel and start building across, and do a widespread fleet replacement. It's actually to extract as much value and life from existing ships as possible and then replace with the right technologies and fuels. So we actually see this as being a sort of chain of solutions, of sort of using those levers and looking at them in tandem with one another to find the most cost-effective way to comply with an emissions reduction target. So that could be a combination of speed optimization, technology implementation, some drop-in biofuels, and then ultimately fleet replacement. And this is just an example of some of the work we've been doing for ship owners. I think what's also quite interesting is the challenge around technology and energy-saving devices. It's obviously a highly sort of fragmented market in that you've got a huge number of technologies available to be installed on ships, but actually their effectiveness is relatively unknown or hard to quantify. So there's sort of two ways you can tackle that challenge. You either do a bottom-up approach where you assess individual technologies and you assess their feasibility and then whether they're the right choice for a particular vessel. Or actually what we find is quite useful is to reverse engineer it. We've been doing work to find a relationship between capital investment for technologies and fuel savings, taking that relationship, understanding how that drives emissions intensity reduction and payback periods. So essentially what that allows us to do is say, if a particular vessel needs X% of carbon intensity reduction plus a payback period of 3 years, that will equate to a certain bucket of technologies. And we can take that bucket of technologies, look at what represents good value versus bad value, and then do the dedicated feasibility studies around that. So it allows us to converge on a potential solution more rapidly, more efficiently. The other big challenge is around the assessment of fuels, both from the perspective of main engine retrofits and new builds. So obviously when sort of ship owners were evaluating new build projects in the past, it was a fairly simple exercise to do that, to understand the technology side of it, but that was very well known, and then understand the revenue potential of that asset. We're now in a place where actually there's far more variables in that process around fuel regulations, the market tiering dynamics I explained. So the way we've been approaching this is actually using a sort of total cost of ownership model. So actually modeling an operational profile across a vessel, applying different technologies, fuels, and stacking them up against one another. And then looking at the total costs over the life of the vessel, so fuel, but also regulatory penalties, and also technology costs. But then also looking at the emissions profile across the life of the vessel and understanding what you need to do to keep that vessel in compliance. And this essentially looks at these vessels from the perspective of both owner and charterer, so owner and their customer. So it's a very useful way to select the right fuel. And finally, I just want to sort of touch on, that really we can't sort of say there's a single challenge here that needs to be addressed. It's actually a kind of multifaceted problem that needs to be solved. And we would always recommend our clients, this is sort of done through a sort of cohesive energy transition strategy, where you do that sort of bottom-up vessel level modeling to understand what do we need to do across each individual vessel in the fleet to keep it in compliance, but also that sort of top-down strategic piece to select the right fuel, look at sort of the ambitions and requirements of your customers, to align closely with them, but then also to think about fleet strategy as well. So do we need to move towards larger asset sizes, for example? Rather than building Cape-sized vessels, do we need to go and build Newcastle-max vessels because we'll gain on the efficiency per unit cargo, but also future energy markets. So thinking about how ammonia will be traded, for example, how liquid CO2 will be traded, or even, sort of MR tankers is a great example. What cargo will the future MR tankers carry? Will it be chemicals? Will it be methanol and other variants? So all these questions come into it, and can help to identify and capture opportunities within the challenges for shipping companies. So that's everything I had planned for today. Thank you very much. I hope we'll have some stimulating discussion on the panel. Thanks.